Am I the jerk for telling my housemate she can't give me unsolicited advice? Posted by you/EmpressOffBakai. I, 27F, have a strange living situation. I live with a family, Chris, 65M, Danielle, 59F, and their daughter, and I do household chores in exchange for rent. I've lived here for 19 months, and it's mostly smooth sailing. I work full-time and am applying to law school. Danielle has some issues with boundaries. She doesn't understand why she can't enter my room without permission, for example, and I know it's both due to age differences and the fact that they allow me to live in their house for free. I have to be very careful when enforcing boundaries. Yesterday, I made dinner for everyone after a full day of chores. Around 10 p.m., as I was finishing the dishes, Danielle told me I needed to steam clean the carpet in the living room because the cats had peed all over it. I did, and as I was putting the steam cleaner away, Danielle entered and said she wanted me to do another room. Because it was 10:30 at this point and I still wanted to work on an application before bed, I politely but firmly said, I'm not going to do that. I probably should have said, I'll do it tomorrow, but I was exhausted, so I just said no. I put the machine away, submitted my application, and went to bed. Tonight, as I was finishing up my meal prep for the week, Danielle cornered me in the kitchen. She said, I don't want to fight about this, but I wanted to mention something. Last night when you told me you weren't going to clean the other room, I found it rude. You should be careful when you say things like that at work so that you don't get fired. I was floored. I snapped, Danielle, you haven't had a job since before I was born. You don't get to give me advice about how to act in the workplace. She rolled her eyes and huffed, see, I didn't want to fight about this, and walked out of the room. I called after her, then maybe don't bring it up. Danielle hasn't spoken to me since, and I don't know what's coming. For context, Danielle has only had one job in her whole life, from age 22 to 25. After that, she quit to raise kids. I grew up very poor, have been working since I was 14, and have been supporting myself since I turned 18. They offered to start our arrangement in 2023 because they needed help around the house and I was struggling financially. As for Danielle's work advice, I currently work as a regional manager at a small firm. Not only is her advice outdated, but I can't take it seriously. I'm a people manager. A lot of my day-to-day job involves being polite but unyielding. I think she was frustrated by my setting a boundary, and that's why she brought it up. I know part of my frustration is that I feel powerless to protest most of the time. I will be moving out in August of this year when I go to law school, hopefully, and my goal is just to make it until then. I'm also really frustrated that Danielle felt like she could say whatever she wanted and then walk away as if I had no right to feel anything. Am I the jerk for what I said? Downvoted commenter. Definitely not the jerk, and good for you. May I ask how you came to live with this family, though? Are they related to you? Why are you putting up with all this weird crap and her bossing you around? Op's response. They're actually my best friend's parents. He suggested the arrangement because he knew I needed help. When I moved in, I was a teacher struggling to afford a studio apartment. Since I moved in, I changed careers and decided I wanted to pursue law school. I took the LSAT 3 times last year on top of all this. I can count on one hand the number of times I've refused a request. I've bleached the showers after midnight, risen at 5 a.m. to make requested meals before work, and done other things like that without protesting. I see this as an opportunity to make my life better in the long term while surviving the short term. I just wanted to say no this time because, truthfully, I physically couldn't handle fulfilling the request. Danielle was insistent it had to be done immediately because they wanted to go to bed at 11 p.m., but I just couldn't do it. Commenter. Do you have a rental agreement in writing? Work exchange needs to be clearly defined, including but not limited to hours, availability, no contact places/times, tasks, etc. Someone demanding that you steam clean 2 rooms at 10:30 p.m. is highly suspect. Chores are too often seen as women's work, meaning undervalued and unpaid invisible labor. However, invisible labor done by women is incredibly expensive in both cost and time, meaning you may well be doing more than what would cover the cost of your rent. Also, I'm inferring from your post that you're most likely downplaying their requests. Op's response. There is no written agreement. I have tried to bring this up on previous occasions due to Danielle's difficulty with boundaries and the sheer amount of work that I do, but it is not well received. Danielle and Chris are very insistent that I am not their tenant and that they are not my landlords, I am their guest. Danielle is also very insistent that she does not want to be referred to as my boss or supervisor in any capacity. To address other comments here as well, my current position does not pay enough for me to live on my own. I realize that the situation is probably predatory, but since there are only 8 months left, I plan to just stick it out. It has saved me a lot of money, and I'm thankful for that. Top commenter. You're the jerk, not for saying no, but for how you said it. You were not polite. Also, Danielle is not your housemate, she and her husband are your landlords and bosses. You may not be paying rent, but you are paying by being live-in help. Ops very downvoted response. Danielle and Chris are very insistent that I am not their employee or tenant and that they are not my bosses or landlords, rather, I am their guest, and they are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. Update 1 day later. I was voted the jerk, which I understand. What I do adds up to about $2,000 per month if you go by the standard of $20 per hour, or about 100 hours per month. Most of those hours are concentrated on weekends and 2 to 3 evenings per week. I make enough food that there are leftovers, so I can have a couple of nights off. Included in those hours is a lot of care for their adult daughter, who lives with us and is disabled. If I babysit the house pets while the housemates go on vacation, which happens a lot, I charge a $20 per day stipend. We have 2 dogs, 3 cats, a gecko, and some fish. One of the cats is mine. This is why I clean the carpet without protest, because it's just as likely the piss was his as any of the other cats. I've said no to requests 3 times in 19 months, and each time has been met with pushback like this. All 3 refusals were due to the time of night they were asked. Many have called this a form of modern-day slavery, and I see where you're coming from. I've been fine with the situation remaining largely undefined because even when I protest chores, I haven't been threatened with eviction. I entered into this situation at a time when I was overwhelmed and desperate. It might be predatory, but it was the best opportunity I had. I could have protected myself better going in. As for why I stay in it, it's because there's an end date in sight, and it will set me up well to keep funneling money into savings for the next few months. If I were evicted, it would suck, but I would be fine. It's not ideal, but it works. I recognize that I should have worded my response better at the time. However, I do want to push back on the idea that I have to do everything they say just because they own the house. If a boss demands overtime from me that's not previously agreed on, I am allowed to say no, and I have done it many times without affecting my employment whatsoever. In fact, my current boss, whom I've done this with the most, often using the same wording as here, wrote me an excellent letter of recommendation for law school. Times have changed since the 1980s, and saying no to unreasonable demands is becoming more and more acceptable. What she meant when she said, "You should be careful when you say things like that at work," was that I shouldn't be assertive at all in a situation where I am a subordinate, which I very much think is outdated advice. I was not invalidating the difficult work of raising a family that Danielle did. I would not dream of offering someone else parenting advice because I haven't been in their shoes. Hypothetically, if the last time I had raised a child was 30 years ago, I also wouldn't give advice on raising a kid in the iPad generation. Danielle should not be doing the same to me about work. She is not my professional boss. She has never worked in my field. She knows that she is not my landlady either. If she were, there would be a whole lot of rules she would need to respect that she doesn't want to, such as entering my room without notice. Again, because I am getting some benefit from the situation, I don't and won't threaten legal action here, as I have enough documentation to protect myself. In addition, Chris, Danielle, and I all have personal stakes in making this work. We have a ton of mutual friends, one of whom is their son and my best friend. Danielle and Chris have some chronic illnesses that make housework hard for them, so they are also getting a lot out of this situation. I plan to apologize and smooth things over. I will follow much of the advice mentioned here about protecting myself better moving forward. Perhaps naively, I hope this will end well. Danielle and I actually get along very well most of the time. We don't hate each other by any means, and we both ultimately want to see the other happy. That's why this has worked for so long. To everyone who says that this situation proves I don't have what it takes to be a lawyer, don't worry, you will probably never be my client. Second update 2 days later. First, as an aside, many of the comments here missed the point. Danielle was not angry with me for refusing to do an additional chore at 10:30 p.m. That was not the issue. Even under the most generous interpretation, demanding additional overtime work at the end of a 14-hour shift is unreasonable, and she knew that. During our follow-up discussion, she added a detail I had completely forgotten. The second room in question has a large potted fiddle-leaf fig tree, and in order to steam clean the additional room, the tree needs to be moved. Neither she nor I were able to move it after multiple attempts, so at that point, I said, until Chris and I can figure out a way to move this, the steam cleaning will have to wait. I know you want it done tonight, but I will not be doing that. This was very important context that I missed when I was angry. The real issue was the exchange the next day. Regarding how I responded when she confronted me about my wording, I now understand that I was absolutely the jerk. As one of my close friends put it, those are inside thoughts. My comments about her work history were also unnecessary and irrelevant. Last night, I approached Danielle and opened the conversation with a profuse apology, no qualifiers, no protests, just a sincere acknowledgement that I was rude during our kitchen conversation and needed to apologize. In turn, she immediately apologized for her incredibly poor approach to the follow-up conversation and for cornering me in the kitchen while I was otherwise occupied, instead of meeting with me at a more neutral time. Chris then joined us, and we had an extensive conversation. During the conversation, I asked them to clarify how they view our arrangement. They were very clear that they don't see me as a tenant, employee, or servant. I pointed out that if that's how they want to frame it, then I need to be free to say no to extra requests. They were receptive to this. I also pointed out that, in our state, I could either be considered a tenant or a live-in domestic worker, but given the length of time I've resided here and the conditions in place, I am definitely not just a guest. They were offended that I see our relationship as fundamentally transactional, which I found kind of funny because, while they have the freedom to frame it in their minds as we're helping this person out, and she's helping us out, it's wise for me to view it differently. I do have obligations to them, and my life carries significantly larger implications should this arrangement not work out. In the end, they agreed that because they aren't landlords and I am not their employee, in their minds, I should have more freedom than I have been given. Chris and Danielle have chronic illnesses that make most of the work I do very difficult for them, including a lot of the care I provide for their adult daughter who lives with us. We then outlined, again, exactly what my responsibilities are, and what they are not. To my surprise, they also apologized for previous invasions of privacy and agreed to install a lock on my room door. It is an interior lock only, so I can't lock it when I'm gone, but I'm fine with the progress. I was never threatened with eviction or anything like that. People can be emotionally mature enough to talk through issues instead of immediately pulling a metaphorical trigger, which is what happened here. After the conversation, I typed out a long email detailing the terms of my living arrangement as it currently stands and had them confirm it in reply. While it's not an official lease, it's a written agreement outlining responsibilities that all parties have agreed to. We also agreed that my monthly hours would be reduced to 80 instead of the roughly 100 I have been working. If the value of that is calculated based on the federal minimum wage, it amounts to $580 every 4 weeks, which is more than most rooms for rent cost in our area. Of course, the labor I provide is somewhat skilled and has a market value of at least double, but I use the federal minimum wage for the sake of argument. I also established that the latest I would be available for housework is 9:30 p.m., except in emergencies. If a task absolutely requires going past that time, I will be taking that time back on a different day. I know I will laugh at this in contracts class in the future, but for now, I'm fine with what it is. Like I said in a comment, it's not ideal, but it works. I'm not in a position where I desperately need this arrangement anymore, but I plan to stay until August because being able to funnel what I would otherwise pay in rent into savings is doing wonders to set me up for the future. To everyone who commented something along the lines of, "You have to do everything she says, you're the help, or you're entitled," I encourage you to reconsider that perspective. Employees, household help, and anyone in a subordinate position are still individuals who deserve basic respect for their space, their time, and their person. No laws, no matter how extensive, take those basic rights away. Also, if you said it was my fault for being in this situation in the first place, kick rocks. We are all working through our own situations, choosing the best available option even if it isn't perfect. That's not weakness or stupidity, that's life.